Okay, so last week we began Hosea chapter 3. It's only 5 verses, but we got through kind of introducing chapter 3 and going through verse 1 to set up what we're going to start today, verses 2 and 3. Hosea is obedient to what God says in verse 1, go take your unfaithful wife back. And he explains his actions to his wife today. So the obvious point that we covered last week is that Hosea and Gomer are functioning as sign acts. All the people are in the story. And the sign act is you're going into exile, Israel. You're going to be away from Yahweh, but he is actually going to restore the relationship between himself and you guys in proper time. Hosea has to embody that. Hosea is embodying God's irrational and chastising love towards his wayward people who have just done nothing but join themselves to other gods, and Gomer is the sign act for that. So, despite her sins against him, Hosea must learn to love and restore Gomer anyways, because Yahweh will love and restore Israel despite her sins towards him. That was last week. Today, what we're going to talk about in verses 2 and 3 is that although Hosea and Gomer are going to continue in their marriage, it's going to be different moving forward, and we want to ask some questions and look at some options. What does it mean? What is Hosea saying to his wife? What is going to be different moving forward in this marriage? And what can we know and what can't we know? It's very, very unclear, but whatever the differences are meant to be are going to be based on, I think, how Yahweh and Israel are going to relate to each other moving forward into exile. And so the sign act of Hosea and Gomer, I'm going to give you some options, but ultimately land on some interpretive ideas that focus on what's really going on between Yahweh and Israel. I think that's the point of them being sign acts, and I think that's the best we can do to understand what Hosea is going to tell his wife here. So let's read the 5 verses again, and then we'll jump into some of the details. So this is what we talked about last week. Yahweh said to me, that is Hosea, go, show love to your wife again, though she is loved by another man and is an adulteress. Love her as Yahweh loves the Israelites, though they turn to other gods and love the sacred raisin cakes. The most densely packed verse in the Bible on the term of love. It's in Hebrew, it's 5 times. In English, they give it a 5th time right here. They add it in to smooth out the English. But even more so than Genesis 13, we see on display God's heart is love in spite of judgment, in spite of wrath. Wrath is not a wicked thing. Wrath is a very godly thing. If your wrath is directed towards injustice, sin, evil in the world, corruption. I spent a lot of time thinking about this week because I was listening to some podcast on, the 7 deadly sins, and wrath is like one of the main deadly sins, often considered second to pride. And I thought, well, wrath isn't really a sinful state the way the 7 deadly sins are, depending on how you define wrath. It can be. It's not inherently wicked. So neither is pride. There is such a good thing as pride. You fix your air conditioner, you feel good about the fact that you saved a bunch of money. Jared and I were talking about that yesterday because he did that. And it feels good when you do that. I was sharing about how I fixed my truck without having to pay hundreds and hundreds of dollars in the past. And, you take pride in your work, and that's not bad. But as long as your pride stays within proper limits, it's good. Well, the same thing is true for wrath, and I was thinking about that a lot. Even love, the thing that I'm thinking in terms of these 7 deadly sins, I read a book last month called Suicidal Empathy by... What's his name? I forget his first name. His last name is S-A-A-D, and so it's just, I think it's pronounced sad. He's a Canadian professor who's I want to say Pakistani immigrant. I don't remember his nationality. But he wrote this book on suicidal empathy and how people try to turn the notion of love to manipulate it and turn it to evil purposes in our day and age. And they try and say, oh, if you're making me feel bad, you're wrong, and you should give up your principles so that I feel good. And they try and claim empathy as like the superior virtue above all. And they take love out of its context. Wrath, love, justice, kindness, all of these qualities of God are in perfect harmony or perfect tension in God because he has wrath about the right things. But he's not purely wrath. He's also love and wrath mixed together. So although he stays his wrath for the sake of love, It will not be tempered forever. Hosea has to learn these traits and these qualities by his justifiable feelings towards his wife and still go after her and show love to her, which is not so much a feeling as go perform your husbandly duties towards your wife, despite the fact that she's not doing any of it towards you.
Are the 7 deadly sins specifically, sin-based, of which God has none, and so wrath for that list and wrath for this list, or 2 different things?
You could make that argument, and throughout history, some people have, because we tend to only have one word, wrath. I think in Greek, but I don't specifically remember, but this is the thought that came to mind, that the word translated wrath and the word translated anger are like vastly different things in Greek. So it didn't, it wasn't a problem in the original languages and stuff, and the church fathers are, of course, working in Greek, so they had reasons why. It's just over time, our English language kind of collapsed it down. Wrath is seen as a negative thing. I tend to think, James in his epistle says, the anger of men does not create the righteousness of God. Like our human wrath when we're just upset or hurt or insulted or something, and we attack back, that's not God's wrath. God doesn't just immediately snap back. Although he will judge sin immediately, he is not destructive and just say, you insulted me, bam, you're dead. Which is, of course, what's been going on in this story and how we can see it. So it depends on how you think of it. It depends on how you define wrath.
And wrath also has to do with the position that it's coming from. God has the right to wrath because he's actually good. Of the structure that defining sin by.
Absolutely.
We do not have that right.
True. However, I think one of the notions, bringing this back to the prophets, that we could go through is that the prophets feel God's wrath against sin and injustice. When we get to Amos is nothing but anger and wrath at his society. He's from the southern kingdom of Judah. He's preaching to the northern kingdom, so it's like my cousins yelling at them for their problems. But he only has one nice thing to say at the very, very last verse of the book. One day after all this wrath is poured out, God will raise up the tent of David and the Messiah will come and all this stuff and it'll be over. But he has nothing good to say, and he's probably the earliest prophet. Being a prophet in part means, being a good Christian in part means you feel as God feels. You understand God, get to know him, and you react and get angry about the stuff that he gets angry about. And the stuff that he doesn't get angry about, you don't get angry about. So somebody that hurts you and insults you or misunderstands you and attacks you or something, just take it, let it roll off of you like water on a duck's back. But when you see true sin and true injustice, you should be upset about that. And you're actually more of an image of God when you share that. So you have to actually define your terms. What is wrath? What is good wrath, godly wrath? Is it a communicable attribute into people? Answer, yes, you can feel God's wrath about the right things, and in fact we should. Our society that's so intent on like social justice and everything are trying to perfect society without God. Like they're angry at stuff, and some of it is extremely legitimate, but they're trying to do so without God, and it's going to create a pseudo wrath of the wrong things. Religious cultures do this. Religious societies do this. So do secular societies and cultures. But it is at least conceivably possible that you can feel wrath about the right things, you can feel love about the right things. Both are attributes of God that are communicated and able to be taken on by creatures like God.
But above all, God is holy.
And that's just binding all of these things together in tension. I'm just saying it's not a be weary of any culture, Christian, secular, I don't care, any voice that tells you it's all about love,
right,
or it's all about wrath, or it's all about one quality, even love, because I think you're absolutely right, Carla. The one quality of God that puts all of these in perspective is that he's holy. He's completely and utterly separate in category, which means he's going to get this right where we all get it wrong. And so we don't even have to get it necessarily right, but we're striving towards an accurate understanding that should hopefully lead towards accurate living out these qualities of God. Hosea is struggling towards that in this aspect of love towards his foolish and sinful wife. which is why in verse 2 he tells us, so I bought her for 15 shekels of silver and about a homer and a lethek of barley. We'll talk about what's going on here. Then I told her, you are to live with me many days. You must not be a prostitute or be intimate with any man, and I will behave the same way toward you. What does any of that mean? Next week, we'll talk about these verses. For the Israelites will live many days without king or prince, without sacrifice or sacred stones, without ephod or teraphim, or household gods. Afterwards, the Israelites will return and seek Yahweh their God and David their king. They will come trembling to Yahweh in his blessings in the last day. So whatever's going on in these verses is about what's going on in these verses. Just keep that in mind today, because we can't ultimately know what specifically is going on in verses 3 and 5, because Hosea doesn't give us a whole lot of detail. I don't explicitly know what it means that he bought her, but let's dive into it and see what we can glean here and the best major options. So one thing I want to point out is in a story like this, it's good to note that in comparisons with prophets like Moses, prophets like Jeremiah, Hosea doesn't give a single back talk to God. He doesn't protest in any way of what God is telling him to do. God says, go marry an adulterous woman. He does so without a single complaint. God says, go take that adulterous woman back. His response is not to complain. He just goes and does it. He seems to be a man of action. At least when God tells him to do something, he's got a good quality. He just goes and does it. He doesn't spend time thinking it through or asking questions or justifying, well, God, she did this to me. Why should I take her back? He's amazing in this regard, and it's so subtle. And it's so quick that in chapter 1 and here in chapter 3, where we actually see him conversing with God, he doesn't raise any complaints. And that's not exactly typical when you know a lot about some of the prophets, because God calls prophets to do extraordinary things, and oftentimes complaining about it first or asking for clarification at least it can be a first step. For Moses, it was like God did all this clarifying, and Moses said, I still don't want to go find somebody else. God gets really upset and says, you're going. So we never see Hosea respond verbally to God's commands. He just responds via verbs. He just goes and does the thing. In fact, his only direct speaking lines in his own book are the words, here to his wife. We talked about who she is. She's obviously Gomer. There's no other option in the story. That's what we talked about last week. And then he explains, I'm doing this not merely because God says so, because of what's going to happen in our people, in our culture, in our kingdom. It's going bye-bye. But he's not this squirrel asking why. He just goes and does it. And that's a good quality. We could all emulate Hosea better if we did the same. So verse 2 begins, so I bought her. Why does Hosea spend money to reacquire Gomer again? What is going on here? And just to boil it down, I'll give you two major options, the best two options that I have found for interpreting what's going on here, because Hosea doesn't explicitly tell us. The first option is he might be redeeming her from debt slavery, hence the cost. Second, perhaps he's paying a bride price again. Do you have a question? Jennifer? Okay, I couldn't tell if you were raising your hand or not. I'm just reaching for the coffee, which seems more important.
Or third option, he was in one of those competitions like in Scotland where you get in and then you get the wife's weight in cheese.
Wait,
What?
I don't know this competition.
What is
Here we go.
What? No.
Oh, it's a thing.
Let's go to Scotland. I want this cheese.
I think it's Scotland. It might be England, but they do a competition where the men have to carry their wives on their backs through an obstacle course, and then they weigh whoever wins. They weigh the wife, and that's how much cheese they win.
Wow. Not heard of this.
So Chuck just needs a wife, and then he can get a lot.
Oh, yeah, I guess I can't compete yet. These are the two options, the best options for what's going on here. And I don't even know that either one of these two options are the right answer or some combination or something. But the best research into what's going on here with the very limited data boils it down to one of these two options. So let's talk about the first option, redeeming her from debt slavery. The argument is that Gomer was in some sort of debt slavery and that this price, never explicitly called a bride price, was necessary to redeem her out of her debts, setting her free to rejoin Hosea's household again. That's the idea, that's the argument. It's perfectly possible historically and socially. one of the things that's got going for it is that, it doesn't read into the text that this is a bride price. It reads into the text a few other things based on the cost. But what we talked about last week was that time has clearly passed since chapter 1, the birth of the kids, and that Hosea and Gomer have been separated. She's clearly in the arms of another man. Is it because she ran off and got herself into so much debt, she's trying to pay it off through sexual services towards a guy? Because we know her character, so they're trying to weave all these facets of what we know about Gomer together. We know she's sexually promiscuous. Here, she's clearly in some sort of debt of some kind that causes Hosea to pay a price to get her back. So they're weaving these ideas together, and the text does not bother actually telling us. The 15 shekels of silver and about a homer and a lethek of barley is a clue, a very important clue. The idea is that she's being redeemed from debt slavery is based on the fact that this amount of money, 15 shekels, a homer and a lethek of barley, is essentially 30 shekels worth of money. A homer and a lethek of barley transferred into a monetary amount would be right about 15 shekels of silver. A homer is approximately 394 liters, in this case of barley. That would cost 10 shekels on average. A lethek is a half of a homer, or about 197 liters, in this case of barley, and so about 5 shekels. So Hosea is paying approximately 591 liters of barley to this guy, or approximately the cost of 15 shekels. So 15 shekels of cold hard cash, 15 shekels worth of food. So you add the 15 shekels explicitly, and you get 30 shekels in cost, and you get the general price of redeeming a slave according to Exodus 21:32. According to that price, 30 shekels total paid in 2 halves, cold hard cash, and food sustenance, which is arguably more important in their culture that's subsist of hand-to-mouth food. Some commentators think that Gomer had become either a slave or some sort of prostitute in need of financial freedom so that she could go back to her husband's house. This is possible. I think this interpretation does go beyond what the text explicitly says. It rests on 2 questionable assumptions. First, there's no guarantee that the slave redemption price of 30 shekels in the Exodus generation remained the same across all these centuries from Moses down to Hosea.
Inflation, am I right?
Inflation was a thing then, as it is now. So for the price to remain the same over 500 years is extremely unlikely, just extremely unlikely. It would ebb and flow. I'm working my way the last year through Thomas Sowell's Basic Economics book. I'm re-listening on Audible to the chapters that I've read already, trying to reinforce what I've learned about basic economics. And everybody knows price is set by supply and demand. Arbitrary goods, scarcity and resources and stuff. How much is there to go around? What is the demand for each of the scarce resources? That fundamentally sets your price. Zohar Mamdani is going to be so egg on his face when he opens these grocery stores where he thinks he can just set the price at 30% below market value, operate at a $300,000 loss each month by doing so, and yet expect his taxpayers to stick around and pay for all that, because that's not how price is set. You do not get one person on top saying, I think I'll charge this much. You get them actually looking at everything that went into it, what it takes to generate it, and if you set a price and say, I will sell this to you for 50 shekels, and then nobody's willing to pay for it at 50 shekels, guess what? It's not worth 50 shekels because the demand is going to drop it down. However, if there are less things and the supply stays the same, but the demand is continuing to rise or something, price goes up. So, at best, your guess based on the nature of inflation would be that coincidentally, the inflation rate had come down or whatever to the point where slaves were exceedingly cheap. And it just happened to be the same cost as during the Moses generation. We can't not know this for certain. It remains on the possibility because price fluctuates, so maybe it happens to be the same cost as in Hosea's day as Moses' day. But that's only a possibility. You can't just say, well, the price is functionally 30 shekels of silver. Therefore, it's automatically the same as what's going on in Moses' day. Second, speaking of Moses, even under Moses' law, the price for redeeming a person is not strictly set at 30 pieces of silver. The law of Moses can and did allow fluctuations in all pricing. It was a thing. So 30 pieces of silver total may be related to redeeming Gomer out of her debts. We just can't know that for certain. Just because of the total cost doesn't mean that's automatically what Hosea is doing. So it's one of those possibilities that remains on the table. Don't cling too tightly to it because we cannot know that for sure. Jeff?
Do we know how much time has passed from when he first married her till when he bought her back?
We do not.
As things age, they lose value.
I didn't say it. Jeff said it. I didn't say it. Jeff said it.
Certain things.
Hey.
I mean, now you all better be praying for me tomorrow that I pass my DOT physical and don't become a sole employee of Carla.
You know, with language like that, you're not going to be able to compete in the cheese contest either. You know, so
he does have a point. Was there a different price because she was has always been considered a sin trade?
I will say, based on Leviticus 27, yes, that actually seems more likely to me, because
a vice price. You know?
What this is actually pointing out is, depending on the person and where they're actually at in society, slaves were cheaper than free people. You had to pay more for free people, but she's obviously not free. We don't know the nature of her slavery, if that's even the right word to this guy. And so we just don't know the context for what's going on. Another factor in this that probably doesn't play that much of a part is they were supposed to, under the law, could keep the year of Jubilee, where all debts are canceled every 50 years. So the closer you were to Jubilee, the less you would pay, because, you know, hey, you don't pay the same in 50 years, the year after Jubilee, for a slave, because he's going to be your slave for 50 years. Depending on if you're 5 years away from Jubilee, you pay a much cheaper price. But of course, they didn't really live up to the year of Jubilee and letting people go from their slavery. So that's probably a non-factor, even though it should have been. But we just don't know, so let's move on to option number 2. Is Hosea paying a bride price again to remarry her? This idea is based off the idea that chapter 2, this dramatized thing, and this is why you don't want to read chapter 2 overly literally, at least threatens divorce between Yahweh and Israel. Is it because Hosea is threatening to leave Gomer? And remember, we came to that, we said, let's not read that too literally, but also, it does not appear anywhere that the husband follows through on his threats to divorce. But because time has passed, and we don't know how much time has passed, does that mean that they're separated or that they were legally divorced? If they were legally divorced, he gets her back in remarriage again. What God is calling for in verse 1 of chapter 3 is God calling on Hosea, go and take your ex-wife back. Now, we'll talk about that in just a minute under the law and what the law says about remarrying somebody you've divorced. So I want to bring this up again because I said this a few weeks ago, but it was also July 4th, so not a lot of people were here. Let me summarize what I ended the lesson on. A bride price was not a financial transaction of ownership. She is not she is not this man's love slave. Hosea is not buying her back to be his love slave. That is a caricature of modern audiences that do not understand the practicality of paying a bride price in ancient cultures, not just Israel, all around. The bride price served a potentially twofold purpose within ancient agrarian societies. First, and the most likely option for all bride prices, is that they were compensating paid to the father of the bride, compensating him for losing a worker on his farm, on his land. Okay? Because the bride is leaving the father's household, which meant farm, and is going to live with her husband and work on his land, the father-in-law is being compensated for losing a valuable worker for his land, either because he needs to hire somebody else to work that land in place of his daughter, And a lot of this depended on how many kids did you have. If you didn't have that many kids, but you had a lot of land, you had to pay for workers. So losing a single worker could be detrimental to your ability to grow food for your family. So when a man comes along and he says, hey, you got 3 daughters, I want to marry one of them, and she's going to live in my house and work my farm, stuff, along with everybody else, and the kids we're eventually going to have and stuff. It's like, well, I can't afford to lose her, so prove to me that you can take care of her by taking care of my family and compensating us for the loss of the worker. That is the most common reason why you paid a bride price. It was not about buying a woman. I just hate that notion. There is a second notion that we don't know how much this applied to Israel. At least I don't. It's very unclear. This first option is definitely the major option. But secondly, perhaps you paid a bride price because it was some form of life insurance in the ancient Near East. Depending on your situation, this is such a fluid, flexible idea. Nothing was guaranteed in the ancient world, not life, not death, not the growing of food. It is unclear to what degree this applied to biblical Israel, but one notion of the bride price was that it served as a means for the bride to live on in the event that her husband's untimely death without needing to return to her father's household, necessarily. If she has kids, but the kids are not old enough to work the farm or something, she can go to her father's house and say, I'm not coming home, but I need the money. And if the father hasn't needed to spend the money on workers or something, he can save the money. And if something happens to her husband, say, good, live off this money until your kids are grown, pay workers in your own household, buy food for your kids so they continue to grow up and stuff, and it's like a life insurance plan. That seems to be the concession. Like if you have enough and you didn't need to spend the bride price, you could use it for this. But this option is the better option, okay? I've already talked about this. You can go back and you can watch that one from the weekend of July 4th for a little bit more detail. But those are the general ideas of the bride price. And I just want you to see it is not some modern feminized idea that men bought and sold women. Men and women in the ancient world, if you were free, bought and sold men and women. It was not a man to women ratio like that, even for sexual purposes. Okay. Now, the trouble with interpreting the bride price idea is that the law of Moses actually forbids remarrying a woman once you have legally divorced her. Go read Deuteronomy 24. This presents certain problems about whether they're divorced or not because the text doesn't tell us. And it depends on how strictly you're reading chapter 2 into chapter 3. There's clearly linked ideas here. But are they divorced or not? If not, why would he pay a bride price again? We simply don't have enough information to make certain decisions about what exactly is happening in this scene. Either option could be right, so could neither option. Maybe she's not in debt slavery, maybe they're not divorced, and maybe the guy's just extorting Hosea, and he has no legal basis to do it. We don't know. It seems best, therefore, to focus on interpreting the text based on the interpretation of Hosea's actions in relation to the Yahweh-Israel relationship that the sign act is meant to convey. So I don't think divorcing verse 2 from what he says about it in 3, 4, and 5 is going to get us anywhere. Looking at the historical details of the historical options isn't going to get us anywhere because Hosea doesn't give them to us. So those are your best options. Let's see what we can learn by taking it in verses 3 and on to this interpretation. Jeff?
Well, if it says that, that she is committing adultery, would that not make it think like they're still married? Because if they weren't married, would she be committing adultery?
That's a good point. It would be a different form of adultery. I will say, because you can commit adultery by sleeping with somebody you're not married to, even if you're not married. And then there's obviously, you are married and you're sleeping with somebody who's not your spouse, so both are forms of adultery. In Hebrew, there is actually a different language here in chapter 3. I'll bring it up some other time, where the word that he uses, you must not be intimate with another man, is related to the idea, it's more specifically adultery, sleeping with somebody who's not your spouse. So it would seem, again, to hint but not tell us that they're still married. If so, how did she get herself in this situation? Why does she need to be redeemed? Is it because she's in debt to the guy? I don't know. It could be both. It could be neither. Let me offer a suggestion here about the relation to the bride price. I think it more likely that Hosea is paying this bride price, and we don't even know what the bride price necessarily would be, but the bride price is based on the fact that he pays cash and money. I mean, food. Cash is money. And this is interesting because in chapter 2, 19 and 20, God says he will betroth Israel again. And it could be that there God is describing paying a bride price, but he's describing paying a bride price of a different sort. It was about, I will betroth you in righteousness. I will betroth you in love. These communicable qualities of God. He says, I will bind you to me by paying these prices. And that's what the cross is actually about. God paying, it's one of the qualities the cross is actually about. I want to point that out because here in 19 and 20 where it says, I'm going to take away your food, I'm going to take away your sustenance and your water. In the redemption part of these verses, he actually says, I'm going to give it back again. I'm going to give it all back. I'm going to pay the price and you're going to get everything back again. Hosea is paying both money and food to acquire his bride Gomer. In 2:8, God says he's going to take away the money and the grain, wine, and olive oil, or the food. 2 categories that will be taken away from Israel as the cost of her apostasy from Yahweh towards her lovers. So it's not exactly a match with what Hosea is doing here, but it doesn't need to be. If he's alluding to here what he says in chapter 2, restoration will come after loss. Gomer's lost everything as Israel is losing everything in chapter 2 because God says, I'm going to take it away from you. You're going to lose everything, but I'm going to restore you, pay the price to restore you, and I'm going to give it all back in time. And what Hosea might actually be doing is acting it out as the sign act, what the argument in chapter 2 was about and how the argument ultimately is supposed to be resolved in the future. So Yahweh, through the sign act of Hosea, remarrying probably Gomer, that might be too strong of a term, and getting back together with Gomer, reconciling with Gomer, but I don't know that they were actually divorced. By reconciling with Gomer, Yahweh is actually acting out his redemptive intentions to restore Israel in chapter 3, that which he takes away in chapter 2. So part of Gomer as a sign act is that she's functioning as the redemptive foreshadowing of everything God said in chapter 2. Regardless of whatever has historically gotten her into this situation. I don't think that whatever historically got her into this situation actually matters. If it did, Hosea would have told us. It doesn't matter. I think he's more focused on saying, look, go act out what I said I was going to do with Israel in this individual relationship. Become the truth. Embody the living reality that I'm going to make known. So that when people look at your relationship and they say, what the heck, Hosea? Why did you take this chick back? He said, because Yahweh loves the Israelites and he's going to take us back as his people again. And then when have we not been God's? Well, you lost everything, so you haven't been God's people for a long time. You've turned your back on him and stuff. So I think the point of what's going on in chapter 3 is that it's acting out a portion of chapter 2. Separation will come, and it picks us up in the middle of that story, and we don't know how long that separation has come between Hosea and his wife. But redemption will come after the separation, because the husband is going to redeem his bride and take her back. So that brings us to what Hosea actually says in these next 3 verses about the nature of the relationship between himself and Gomer. I'm going to take you back, and God's going to take back the Israelites. However, there's going to be some differences moving forward between us that are going to also act out this relationship. And that difference is, I told her, you are to live with me many days. You must not be a prostitute or be intimate with any man. I think this was the Hebrew word that actually refers to adultery here. This is, I think, the same word in chapter 1 that I said was heinous harlotry, a bit of Hebrew alliteration. Intimate with any man implies you must not be with any man who's not your husband. But it might actually be implying more than that. I will behave the same way towards you, I don't think is a great translation, but let's see if we got time to dig into this. So I think, just to summarize verse 3, in colloquial English of our modern vernacular, we can fix this relationship, but it will mean hard choices for both of us moving forward. And I think that makes good sense, because most relationships can be fixed, regardless of the damage done to them, if you're willing to love somebody unconditionally and make hard choices in the relationship.
Okay, but he has behaved the same way towards her this entire time. Why is he making this promise again? As if she doesn't believe it.
As if she doesn't believe it?
Like,
Because she has no reason to distrust him.
yeah, she has no reason not to think that he would behave this way. Because
Well,
this is the nature of what he has treated her as
Very
this
true.
entire time.
Very true. Let's see if walking through there, I can give you maybe one answer to that, of why it's going to require trust from her, if Hosea might be saying what some people have suggested that he might be saying. I've already mentioned this. This is the only time Hosea actually speaks in the book. He's speaking to her. And they're notoriously difficult words to understand. It leaves lots of commentators scratching their heads, trying to put this into context. What precisely is he saying to Gomer about their marriage? That's the real question. More importantly, what does it mean for Israel in relation to Yahweh moving forward? So the obvious is always the place we want to start. We should understand that what Yahweh is calling for in verse 1 for Hosea is to seek some level of marital reconciliation with his wife Gomer. That's part what we talked about last week, why this has to be Gomer and not some other woman. But whether or not they're officially legally divorced cannot be known from the information we have in the story of the text. We don't know if she just ran off but she's still married to Gomer, or if the threats in chapter 2 in the dramatized scene actually took place in their relationship. It's possible that they were legally divorced, and it would explain why he pays a second bride price. But under the law of Moses, you were not allowed to remarry a woman you found fault in. The idea of saying, okay, she's with another man. This is Deuteronomy 24. If a man finds fault with this woman, meaning she's sexually promiscuous, and he writes her a certificate of divorce, sends her away, she marries another man, and then that man divorces her or is willing to give her up and stuff, the first husband can't go and remarry her again. So it would seem, if that's the option, that that's actually a violation of the law of Moses, and God wouldn't call Hosea to do it. Which is why I'm not married to that interpretation. Because it's just as possible that they never completely divorced. They never completed the divorce proceeding. And Gomer just ran off and shacked up with another man, despite her legal relationships to Hosea. I think that's probably a simpler understanding, but I don't know that for sure. We just don't know the details. Everything's speculation. And I don't want to get us too far off track of the real point. It's for Yahweh to speak through Hosea. He's not just speaking to Hosea and then Hosea is saying everything to Israel. He's speaking through the man, through his life, through his family circumstances, to communicate the truth about Israel's relationship to God. So I don't want to waste time with unknowable speculation. I want to attempt to limit myself to what can most likely be gleaned from the relationship to Yahweh and Israel through Hosea and Gomer. So when he says, you are to live with me many days, more literally you could translate that, for many days you will dwell as mine. And it indicates an indeterminate length of time, but also this idea of mine is to say the same thing between Yahweh and Israel. Yahweh has exclusive rights to Israel alone. Israel is not to go and serve other gods. That makes God what? Jealous. Jealousy stirs up his wrath, which all the things we've already talked about here this morning. It's not a notion of ownership. It's a notion of private relationship, which I've mentioned before. Intimacy is driven and fueled by what? Exclusivity. So a part is to say you are to be exclusive with me, not with other men. For an indeterminate length of time, this is supposed to be our relationship here. In verse 4, we learn that it's really to do with Israel living without a kingdom for an indeterminate amount of time. So keep that in mind for next week. However, whatever time frame this is, it's limited, it's finite, it will eventually end. But the marriage is officially on again. Whether the remarriage of redemption or debt slavery, regardless, they're officially legally remarried, and Hosea is trying to say, in part, don't go do what you just did. Don't make me have to go buy you out of another relationship here so we can be together. So, whatever the decisions that kept them apart of being a single household, they're once again able to live as a family under a single roof. Despite that, this is not forgive and forget. What she has done cannot be undone. What Israel has done in breaking the covenant, shattering it, cannot be undone. So there are consequences to her crimes. They're going to be a single family living under a roof again. But it would seem that this statement is telling Gomer that there will need to be changes in the relationship moving forward. What are the changes moving forward? Well, the obvious one is that Gomer cannot be sexually deviant any longer. So always start with the obvious. But the nature of the language here might be indicating sexual abstinence actually between Gomer and Hosea. When he says, you must not be intimate with any man, is Hosea excluding himself from that? So I made this meme. You can't be with any man, except for you, right? Except for you, right? It is possible that Hosea is communicating a sexless marriage between them moving forward for an indeterminate amount of time. That is a valid interpretive possibility based on his language here. It's time enough to rebuild the relationship, to gain true intimacy without sex actually clouding the issue. The text may not be going so far, but it is possible given the further explanation in verses 4 and 5 regarding Israel's future and return. Their future desire to seek Yahweh, but first they have to live many days without Him. How do you get your wife to actually desire you again and not other men? Make sure she can't sleep with anybody, not even you, and see what happens to her sexual desires. The NIV in this phrase, I will behave the same way towards you, seems to be taking Hosea's words as a reciprocation of whatever marriage boundary he's placing on their relationship moving forward. So I think the NIV is translating it in a way that's interpreting it, no sex, not even between you and I. That may be reading too much into that translation, but I don't know. If it is no sex between them, Hosea would be saying that he will also not pursue sexual relations with anyone else, despite not sleeping with his own wife, even if they're living in their own house, which takes us back to what you mentioned here. Hosea has been faithful to Gomer. Gomer has no reason to think that Hosea is going to run off with another woman. In fact, she's given him every reason to do it, but if it is moving forward for some indeterminate amount of time, a sexless marriage between them, then what Hosea is saying is, despite this idea, Hosea is proclaiming his intentions to sleep, not even sleep with Gomer moving forward, but is telling her, I'm not going to pursue you sexually, we're not going to have a sexual relationship right now, but even so, I'm still not going to pursue another woman. I'm not going to expect sex out of you, but I'm not going to go find it in a different source either. And that's a big promise for any man to make, especially to his wife. But it gives her time, I would suggest, to see and understand his concern and love for her without her having to expect sexual gratification towards him as payment. Remember, the attitude that Gomer brings to the table here that we can see in the wife described in chapter 2. She thinks by sexually shacking up with lots of men, her payment is food and money and these things that are taken away. She needs to have that idea fixed. She needs to realize that she's loved without sex on the table and that she can't buy Hosea's love. And that Israel can't buy Yahweh's love. They already have it. And Yahweh wants them to respond of saying, I already love you, so could you please just learn to love me back the right way without necessarily trying to manipulate or control me into thinking that I'm going to pay you money or food as a response for your love towards me. And I don't know if Hosea is specifically deciding or moving forward, this is going to be a sexless marriage, but it would make good sense of the emotional dynamic that needs to happen here and the story between Yahweh and Israel. You've got to stop thinking of your relationship with God as a transactional thing. And Hosea is trying to teach that to Gomer, and through Gomer teach it to Israel. And so Israel's going to have to go without for a while in verses 4 and 5.
So this is a precursor to the idea of grace through salvation.
Grace is already a part of Yahweh's love towards Israel.
But they don't understand that.
That's not entirely correct. This generation doesn't understand that that's true. Israel knows, because it's in the law, Yahweh didn't choose you because you were the greatest nation, because you were the most plentiful, or because you were the richest. You were the smallest, you were the most menial, and He just chose to love you. He just chose, and that's grace. That's God choosing mercifully that these are going to be His people. But it's true, this community here now does not understand that and needs to explicitly love that. But it is a part of their greater story. But remember what we talked about in chapter 2, as she's deliberately forgetting her husband until she loses everything, Hosea's generation in Israel has deliberately forgotten things about God that they once knew. They have deliberately turned their back on Him and refused to acknowledge Him. So it's not like it's not a part of their story. It's not that they can't figure it out. It's that they don't want to. And this notion of saying you're going to live without for some time, the indeterminate notion of time with many days says it is in part, I think, Hosea telling Gomer, it doesn't have to be sexless forever. But you need time to get your mind right, to get your heart right with me. I suggest that perhaps we tweak the translation of the Hebrew phrase, I will behave the same way towards you. And some of translations do this, I just don't know which ones, to, yet even on my part, I will be with you. Because I think what Hosea is saying is, even without sex, I will still be a husband to you. That she needs to hear, I do not think of you as a sexual object for my gratification like these other men do. I'm going to treat you like a person. I'm going to act like a husband to you in every way except sex, till you understand and get it through your hard heart that you are loved regardless of sexual satisfaction towards me. And that is the main draw that she needs to understand. She doesn't need other men to be attracted. So I think what Hosea is attempting to communicate here is that he will lovingly care for his reconciled wife Gomer, even without the expectation of sex between them. He will not be faithless and turn to other women. He will remain committed to her until their relationship can be repaired from its brokenness brought about by her sexual activity. But sometime in the future, when she has had time to get her sexual desires under control through abstinence, and through the relationship between the husband and wife has had time to grow in intimacy without sex confusing the issues, she will be able to come back together with her husband again. How long that's going to take is indeterminate. It depends on how long it takes Gomer to truly put her past of sexual choices behind her and choose to repent of them and move on to a new path towards a good husband who inexplicably loves her. This, I think, makes the most sense of the text, considering their relationship being a sign act and how they how things will go moving forward between Israel and Yahweh in the next few verses, which we will get to next week.